Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So, if you are relatively new to my channel, you might be unaware that the reason I started making videos was out of frustration a little bit. I try to give advice fairly regularly. It's been a little while now, but I try to get on the Reddit forum. Um, what is it? IT career help. Basically, it's a lot of people who are newer to tech, um, trying to figure out how to get a career and how to establish themselves and get into the business, which is fantastic. And it's something that people helped me out with when I was younger. So I feel like it's part of my almost obligation to sort of pass that forward and help other people with. So that's why I started this video. And the very first video on this channel, if you go back and take a look at it, is how to slash should you be a Unix administrator or something along those lines. Mainly the how to slash should you piece was the main bit, and that was because I saw a number of posts for people coming into tech from other careers, mainly sales. I had seen 4 or 5 of these posts within maybe a month, and that was with me only kind of checking occasionally, right? So not sort of monitoring it very actively. And the point of it was is having been through the dot com crash and the dot com boom. What I saw was there was a lot of people who went into to tech who didn't enjoy it. They just did it for the money. And in the short run, it's something that you can make a decent amount of money at, and you can make a decent living at. But it was very very hard on those people because it takes a weird kind of brain to enjoy the engineering and kind of sciences. And I think a lot of people don't think of tech as that, but it is. It's engineering. So um, um, last week, maybe the week before, but it's been sort of bubbling around the back of my mind for a little while now. But when I got my boat, it came with a SSB radio, a single sideband radio. And I had been introduced to ham radio stuff a little bit when I was a kid. Never really got into it, but was looking at the radio and some of the things that you can go do in terms of downloading weather and some interesting stuff. And went down a little bit of a YouTube black hole, which I'm sure that you guys are all familiar with. When you start watching one video, and then the next thing you know, you've been sucked into some topic that you didn't think you'd really ever be interested in. And in watching these videos, I came across some ham radio technician class um, prep courses, and started watching some of the videos. And I think probably I'm going to go get my ham radio tech license, and then maybe my general after that. Um, but one of the things that was really interesting is as I was watching these videos, the kind of thinking that you're going to be doing to get your introductory ham radio license is very similar to the kind of thinking and the kind of stuff that you would be doing if you're going to be a Unix admin, or if you're going to be doing DevOps, or if you're going to be a cloud engineer. All these kind of things take the same kind of brain and the the same kind of interests and the same kind of like, oh, this is a puzzle. Let me play around with how this works, and sort of um, enjoying taking in a lot of knowledge. And it occurred to me that for folks who are considering getting into the tech sector, whether that's as a Linux or Unix administrator, whether that's as a DevOps, whether that's just with help desk, that getting your ham radio technician license might be an incredibly useful thing. And I know that sounds weird because it's on the surface very dated technology that people aren't using. But the first thing is to get your ham radio technician's license. is about $15, right? So it's $15 to take the test. Worst case scenario, you failed the first way through, you take it again a second time, it's $30, right? So very, 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 very cheap to get your license. Second, you can get a ham radio, which used to be very, very, very expensive for significantly less money now. You can get something called a Baofeng, Baofeng, UV5R, which is a 5-watt handheld ham radio for about $25 on Amazon, which is, way cheaper than they used to be when they were, $1,000 sets. And those are still out there. You can get those. But you can get into playing around with ham radio very inexpensively. So it's not going to cost you a lot to get into the hobby, right? So you basically take the $15, you take the $25, add it together. Right? Pretty simple math. You're below $50 on this, right? So you're looking at about $40. Add in a little bit of tax and stuff. Not too bad, right? So pretty inexpensive, and it's not a massive amount of information that you need to retain. Right? You need to learn a little bit about frequencies. You need to learn about the relationship between voltage and amps and resistance. And you need to learn about the power formulas. And there's a number of different things that you need to learn. But it's not a huge amount. I imagine that with about a week or two worth of studying, self-studying and reading and watching some YouTube videos, you could go get your ham radio technician's license. And then you could be a licensed operator to go do amateur radio in the United States. And if you're somewhere outside of the United States, I know that a lot of countries, their introductory licenses are much more difficult. I think in Canada, it's a 100 question test that you need to go past for your entry level license. In the US, it's a 35 question test. They're random questions, so you still need to go study for a lot of stuff, but it's potentially a little bit easier. But I still think it's a good test, which is what I'm getting around to. If you think that you want to become a Linux administrator, or you think that you want to get into DevOps, if you think that you want to do help desk stuff, whatever it is that you're doing, and you're somebody who doesn't have a history of playing around with technologies just for fun, building electronics, doing RC cars, rocketry stuff, taking apart electronics like your radios or dishwashers and stuff when they break and putting them back together. If that's not a thing that you've been doing throughout your life, and you're thinking about getting into tech, there's a good chance that you're going to hate it. If I'm honest. Now, maybe not initially. Maybe you'll initially be, salved by the money that you can go ahead and make, because once you get into the upper ends of the field, you can make a pretty good living. But 10 years in, you might realize that, oh God, I just spent 10 years advancing a career towards something I have no interest in. I would have much preferred doing whatever it is that you're actually interested in, or that you have a brain that gives you a lot of abilities for. Um, you know, you're very personable, and maybe you need to go ahead and interact with people all the time during the day. Maybe sales would have been a much better job for you, or maybe client services or marketing or things like that. There's other areas where you can make a good living, especially after 10 years. So, what I think is, instead of trying to go get your Red Hat certification, or trying to go ahead and learn the foundations of networking to go get your CCNA, or to go back to school and spend a huge amount of money on it, self-study, right? There's classes out there, but self-study. Don't take a class. Use resources on the internet. Go buy a book if you want to do it that way. Watch YouTube videos if you like doing that. But self-study, because that's going to be what a lot of your engineering life is going to be if you get into tech, regardless of what specific field you get into. Self-study for the ham technician's license, and then go take the test and see how that felt. Especially, and I think this may actually be one of the most useful pieces of this, is especially if you are not inclined to do ham radio stuff, right? Because there's going to be many instances when your employer says, "Hey, we need to go ahead and do a migration from Subversion to Git, right? Learn all about that stuff and then do the migration, right? So that's something that you might just be tasked with if you're kind of on a sysadmin or an IT kind of track, right? That's just an example. That happened to be a project that I was talking to somebody about recently. So you may not be interested in Git. You may not be interested in Subversion. You're still going to need to learn it if that's your job. And what you're going to need to do, more importantly, is find a way to make it interesting and see how you can go about doing that. So if you're not interested in ham radio at all, well, that's good in a sense, because you can test whether you have the kind of personality that's going to let you learn things and acquire a lot of information in a relatively quick period of time and not hate it. And if you do have that kind of personality, you'll probably have what happened to me, which is as you're sort of learning about the ham radio technician stuff, you find all these interesting bits where it's like, oh, I didn't know that there was a whole bunch of data modes that I could go ahead and use. And I wonder if I could maybe write some software around that. Or, this is a pretty interesting thing that and part of it's I have a ham radio on my boat. Basically, that's what an SSB is it's one of the amateur bands that you're allowed to go ahead and use. So you get sucked in. And, you know, if you're of this personality type that ends up becoming an engineer, it's going to suck you in. And there's a lot of really interesting aspects to it. So that's my suggestion is use getting your ham radio technician license as a test, because it's only going to take you about 2 weeks. It can be a much smaller investment of your time than it would be to take most of the other kind of certifications. And I think it's a really neat idea. Also, and here's the sort of secondary and tertiary kind of benefits that you get from it. The secondary benefit is that this is a hobby largely driven by nerds, right? And by nerds, I don't mean hipsters or people who sort of claim to be nerds because they like Star Wars or Star Trek. I mean legit old school nerds, people who had slide rules when they were a kid, like old school nerds. And you know who old school nerds are now? They're executives, right? They're very, very, very senior engineers. If you start talking to a guy who's, doing ham radio stuff and he's been, doing this stuff when he was 16 in the 50s, right? He's probably pretty highly placed now. So it's actually a really, really good networking route to take. The people who are going to be doing this and the people that you will meet are going to potentially be in a position where they can help you. Now, I live in Southern California, so part of my research for this was looking around for the different repeaters and resources and stuff that are available in my area. And I live very close to El Segundo, and El Segundo, if you are not aware of it, is one of the bastions of aerospace in the United States. And there are ham radio clubs that there's one for Hughes, and Hughes is one of the, basically it was Howard Hughes Aerospace, and that became I think Raytheon now is who owns Hughes. Might be Northrop. I always get confused. But there's Raytheon, there's Northrop, there's Boeing, there's all of these companies in my area, and I can guarantee you that there's a bunch of people who are comprising those ham radio clubs that work at those companies. Likewise, if you go up to Silicon Valley, you better believe that there's people that work at Oracle and Google and Apple and Microsoft who have ham radio licenses, right? So these are people who are in their spare time doing really interesting, really nerdy, really fun sciencey kind of stuff that probably are not going to directly help their career, right? So those kind of people are going to be doing engineering for a job, right? That's almost certainly what the case is might be. Now these days, apparently, there's a lot of people that are getting into it just to be preppers, like disaster preppers, or I'm not sure exactly what the right terminology for it is, but people who are into preparedness for some kind of disaster, governmental or environmental or whatever it is. So I guess there's sort of a subsection of those kind of people, but still, it's a good networking opportunity for a lot of you guys. And then lastly, you know the third kind of benefit is that yeah, actually it is a very useful thing for kind of disasters and stuff. And if the last few years have showed us anything, there's a lot of natural disasters that have been happening due to climate change. And if you don't believe in climate change, cool, that's great. But it's still a good idea to be prepared. I take back that that's great. That's terrible. You're an idiot. Um, it's a real thing. I used to work for the former director of atmospheric studies at NASA, and they're smart people and they don't make this stuff up, right? Um, the gentleman who I worked for had 2 PhDs from MIT. He could have had a job anywhere and made ridiculous amounts of money. He had Stephen Hawking's like home, teletype number, right? So he was friends with him. He was one of the smartest people probably on the planet. And he worked at a government agency, probably making a third of what he could make elsewhere because he was interested in the technology stuff. And anyway, I'm getting derailed. Um, there's a lot of natural disasters, right? Regardless of your rationale for deciding whether you want to participate in, and because of those things, or your belief in global warming or otherwise. Obviously, there's a lot of hurricanes that are happening lately, significant in their power. I live out in California, so we have things like forest fires, we have earthquakes. If you live elsewhere, there's going to be things like blizzards. There's a lot of things that happen, and we've put so many eggs into these baskets of the internet and cell phones that it's nice to have sort of a backup tool at your disposal that just also happens to be a really fun hobby that you can go learn about. And in the case of something like a disaster, it's nice to have that secondary mechanism to be able to go find out what's going on and things like that. So anyway, I'm not suggesting that you get into ham radio as a hobby. I think it'd be kind of cool if you did. It's fun and esoteric, and again, I think for a resume, it actually might be really neat to be able to put in, licensed ham radio operator, um, you know, because I bet you that during an interview, that's going to come up, and it's going to say something about you and what kind of person you are, and your potential for learning complicated things, if you're doing that on your own. So I think it's potentially an interesting one. I'm gonna go call the video, and say that that's it for the video for now. But I think that's a really nice potential thing to go do it. As a sort of follow up to things I was talking about in previous videos, I know that I said I was going to do a friends and family class, and I was going to try to go get that schedule. My schedule has been in a little bit of flux. They've been taking classes off and putting them on. So it's made it kind of difficult for me to figure out exactly when to schedule that. I'm probably going to have to go push that back maybe to August. I'm still going to go do it at some point, I swear. But I'm probably gonna have to go push that off a little bit longer. So thank you guys for your patience, and I will put out a specific video when I have some firmer dates around that. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you've enjoyed this, please give it a like. If you want to see more of these kind of videos, subscribe, as I'm sure you've heard everyone on YouTube say already. And consider going out and getting your ham radio license, or at least looking into it. Especially if you're somebody who is not 100% sure if this is the right career track for you. I think it would be a very good way to go ahead and validate that it in fact is, or find out that it isn't very early on before you've invested a lot of your time and resources to to figure that out. So thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.